Hi there, and welcome to today's episode where we chat with Gayle Johnson, who is a creative, reflective writing facilitator as well as a copywriter for coaches and therapists. So I came across Gayle a while ago, probably somewhere on the social media through LinkedIn, but what really grabbed my attention was her writing membership, her community called Wordspill, because around the time I was looking to tap more into my writing experience, to figure out a little bit more creative writing, to challenge myself, to build a practice of writing. And that's exactly what Gayle does, and that is something that we talk about today. We talk about the differences between creative and reflective writing versus journaling. What are the benefits and pros and cons and approaches that Gayle takes towards writing, why anyone is a creative writer in their mind, anyone is a writer, and why you can't write it wrong. So if you're curious even a little about writing in any capacity whatsoever, then join us in today's episode.
Before we get into this beautiful conversation, we have a newsletter and we love sharing information that we've got from our guests. We only send it out twice a month, so you're not bombarded by all sorts of stuff. And we love to share a little bit more on our guests, from our guests, our perspectives or tips and advice that we've got from our guests. So do sign up. The link is below in the description. Sign up to our newsletter. And as I said, we don't spam you. We just get 2 newsletters a month with beautiful and very good advice and tips and just some musings as well, which is always wonderful. But now let's get on with this wonderful conversation about creativity.
Well, hello, welcome Gayle. How are you today?
I am great, thank you. I'm hot, super hot. I'm in the coolest part of my house because it's 31 degrees out there today. But I'm really pleased to be here. As I said to you before you press record, you've been super flexible in enabling me to have this conversation with you. And I'm just really full of gratitude for that. And I'm excited to see where it takes us. I don't quite know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be fun.
That's the beauty of this podcast. We don't have an agenda, we don't have expectation. We're here to chat and to learn from you and to see exactly where this wonderful journey is going to take us. So to get started, would you mind telling us and our listeners a little bit about you? So I know a little bit about you. I know that you're a writer, that you're coaching writing, you're helping writing, you're anything writing related, and you have a wonderful writing group. But from your experience, from your perspective, how did this happen? Where did writing become your thing, your business, your life's mission?
Sure. Okay. So I work as a creative, reflective writing facilitator. That's one family of work I do, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. And I also work as a copywriter for coaches and therapists, particularly those that adopt the ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy type framework. And I can also chat a bit about that. And how did it all start? I've always been a writer in the sense that if you write, I very firmly have this belief that if you write, you're a writer, right? And I'm one of these people that writes to think. Like, I can't really think without a pen in my hand. So writing has just been in my life like breathing from the start. I suppose I didn't have a traditional route into earning a living as a writer. I came into copywriting through employment, mostly out of circumstance, like fortunate circumstance in many ways. I was always the person that did the writing and the writing for web copy in my job. I used to work at university. And then it just came to a point where I couldn't be employed anymore. I had children, and the job and the children and the whole situation just didn't work, and I needed to find something to do. And then someone asked me to do some copywriting, and that's kind of how it started. And then a few years later, someone asked me to do some to write their book for them, to ghostwrite their book for them, and that's how I got into book writing. So my journey specifically to creative reflective writing actually came through the copywriting. So I learned very early on with copywriting that I wanted to be really picky about how I sort of supported people and what I helped to enable to come into the world, right? And I learned this through what I think is a funny story. You might want to edit it out afterwards, but I'll tell you the story anyway, and you can choose. So one of my very first, I got a scholarship, right, to into blogging. So back in 2015 or so, I won an award to take on this online course on how to be a blogger. So there's all sorts of training out there, and I went through this particular school, if you like, on this scholarship. And through that, I made some other writing connections of people who were already working in content writing, yeah? And one of those people wanted to offload some of their work to another writer. And it was very, very early days for me. I was actually still in employment at the time. So it was just a sort of handover-y type liminal time in my life. So I was like, yeah, I'll take it on. That's great. And I got the brief through just by email. This was a Californian guy. Darwin, his name was. I remember very clearly his name. And so his client, it turned out, was a gynecological cosmetic surgeon. And the articles that they wanted me to write for money were headlines. So I'd got the headlines. Why should I choose labial sculpting? Was the first article that I was ever asked to write for money. And, you know, this taught me such an important lesson very early on in my writing career, if you like, is that I really want to be careful about who I'm supporting. I only want to amplify the voices of people who I believe are doing good. And I'm going to be a values-driven copywriter. So I spent the next few years positioning myself as a values-driven, compassionate copywriter. And by compassionate, I always talked about that being about compassion for yourself as the client. So as a copywriter, I would really help my clients understand what their particular strengths were, what their kind of ways of doing things were that were unique to them, but also compassionate to their reader. So it made it really easy for the reader to understand what was going on and whether something was for them. Although all that's kind of in like the marketing sphere. And I know you'll know all about that sort of stuff, but I liked compassion as a lens through which to approach copywriting. And that's what I did for a few years. And I will come on to how I got to creative reflective writing. So basically, I then went on to mentor micro businesses who perhaps weren't ever going to want to hire a professional copywriter, but they wanted to learn the kind of techniques and how to do copywriting, content writing for their own businesses, right? So I did these sorts of things on a one-to-one. Sometimes we did it over online, but quite often I'd do it face-to-face with people. They'd travel up from London or wherever. We'd get in a room together and we'd have a few hours together. And this is the one thing that stood out to me every single time. These people did not need help with how to structure a blog or how to think of an email title. They needed help connecting to themselves. They had all these layers smothering them from really talking about what they wanted to talk about in their own voice that felt real. It was that stuff that got me thinking, where I can most help people be compassionate to themselves is by getting them to connect with themselves first. Because if they can connect with themselves first, then they can send their message out and their readers will connect with them. And so that took me on the path of training in reflective writing, therapeutic and reflective writing, and learning about all these ways in which we can use writing to connect with ourselves more. And I could go on, and I will go on if you like, but I might just give you a moment to just, if you want to ask any questions about that bit of it, feel free.
No, it's a wonderful perspective to bring in, and thank you for sharing the story. I think we will leave the story in because it's a very pointed example of yeah, you have the choice. You need to step in the choice of who you want to work with and be clear on the boundaries of who are the ideal clients that you would want to be working with. And oh boy, this sounds like a very painful lesson to go through as a first client, to have to write on these topics with a client. Never ever again. It's for someone, not for everyone. But I love the way you're explaining your journey into kind of creative and reflecting writing. And definitely for me, the point of, you have a pen, you're a writer, you have the ability to type, you're a writer. There's kind of a mind shift between, writer is someone who has published a book, someone who gets paid to write, versus it's just someone who is capable of writing. And it doesn't need to even be pretty or perfect or grammatically correct. And I know it from experience because I've been part of your membership for a while, and I've been joining some of your facilitation sessions with the community, where always the encouragement was, don't think too much about it, and don't worry about the grammar and spelling and perfection, but connect with yourself, connect with the prompts, connect with what is calling you and what's being said. And I would love to learn then a little bit more about the acceptance and commitment therapy model, the ACT. How does that then connect to the work you do? What is it all about? Who is it for? What is the reason behind you then going into this route as well?
Sure, absolutely. So ACT, first of all, I would say ACT is a psychological model. So it comes from the world of science and from psychology, and I am not a trained psychologist at all. So apologies in advance to anybody listening who thinks she's got that bit wrong. I'm going to hold my hand up now. I don't claim high ACT expertise, but I do want to put it out there as something for people to go and research and investigate for themselves. So ACT is a psychological model really about humans and language, right? So it's grounded in the theory that as people, as humans, we are the kind of only species that is able to relate things to one another in the way that we do, which means that we can tell stories, which means that we can anticipate things. So because we use signs and symbols and words, it massively explodes the world for us, right? Which is a fantastic thing. It's meant that, our consciousness and our brains have been able to really develop beyond that of other mammals. So absolutely, that's fabulous. But it also brings with it a whole heap of trouble, because it brings with it things like anxiety, because we can catastrophize. So there's one example that I often like to mention, which, so if you're teaching a child not to walk into the road, potentially, if a chimp or something was doing that, they would have to witness it, right? And they would perhaps even kind of put their baby chimp, slightly in danger to kind of really experience the threat, or to witness the threat. Or they would be in a position of danger and stop the chimp from running in front of a car, right? What we often do is we will talk through that scenario with our children. So we are training ourselves as a species to cope with threats that we have not experienced. And we are able to link one thing to another in so many different ways. And this is where acceptance and commitment therapy is grounded in the kind of the joy and the problem that comes through us being able to relate one thing to another. So it's a model for life, and it's also a model for therapy. And it has basically 6 principles. And the reason why I love it so much in my work is that I think each of those 6 principles can relate really powerfully to writing. So you're going to put me on the spot, and I'm going to really try and make sure I remember these. So first of all, there's one about contact with the present moment. So kind of like mindfulness, it's about being grounded in where you are right now. So kind of stepping away from that anticipation of danger or ruminating about what's gone on in the past. It's contact with the present moment now. And writing is a really powerful way to do that, because it's about exploring what's going on for you in your brain right now. It's a very grounding practice. So there's a really lovely kind of connection there. Another one of the 6 principles is something that ACT practitioners called diffusion. So not diffusion like gas diffusing, but DE fusion. So basically stopping, fusing with your thoughts. So rather than having the thought that saying, you know, I am an anxious person, or I am a terrible driver, or I am a terrible friend, it's creating a bit of distance between that thought and yourself. So you might say, I am having the thought that I am a terrible friend. And you can even go one step further and say, I am noticing that I am having the thought that I am a terrible friend. And it creates this distance. And similarly, with writing, as soon as you get something on the page and out of your head, you can really clearly see it is not you. Yes, it's come from you, but it is not you. It's a thing that is on the page. There's a physical distance there too, because it's in your notebook. So that's 2 of the 6 principles. Another one is called self as context. And again, it's a bit like the diffusion thing. I think there's a saying in kind of Buddhism and in yoga circles about I am the sky and your thoughts are the weather. And it's that sort of principle that you are bigger than everything going on within you. And again, writing and creative reflective writing, and I will talk a bit later in our conversation about what creative reflective writing is, because it's not just journaling. It does borrow a lot from journaling, but it's not exactly the same as journaling. But creative reflective writing and journaling actually really help us understand that we are so many different things happening at once. We are so much bigger than one single story we might have about ourselves. So that's 3 of the 6. There is what is the 4th one? I'll come back to the 4th one, but there's another 2 to do with how we actually show up in the world, how we present ourselves in the world. One of them is to do with values. So, you know, anyone who works in business or who works in marketing or who works in personal development, self-help, will know very well about values, about these being kind of guiding principles, directions of travel for how we want to live. So they're not goals, but they are kind of North Stars, so we can kind of set our direction. Like if I genuinely believe in compassion, are the choices I'm making compassionate choices, for example? Writing's a fabulous way to unpack and explore all that stuff. And then the final one of the 6, and I'm going to have to come back to number 4. The final one of the 6 is committed action. So this is, again, you know, within coaching, you might help someone identify their values, and then some actions will arise coming out of those values-driven action. And committed action is all about kind of what you're going to say and how that's going to work. So yeah, and I'm going to own up to the fact Lenka's just nudged me. The 4th one is acceptance. So acceptance is a really interesting principle, because I think in some understanding of the word acceptance, it can feel like defeatism. Some people might understand acceptance to be like, oh, well, that's what's happening. Just have to deal with it. Within ACT, and I think within a lot of mindful practice as well, that's not what acceptance is. Acceptance is a willingness to be with what is right now. And within the ACT model, what that means is once you kind of have that willingness to stand where you are, you can then make a plan for going forward. So it's rather than struggling with where you are. And again, like I say, I'm not a therapist, but I think quite a lot of the time, I am someone that's experienced anxiety. And quite a lot of the time, what we struggle with is our feelings of anxiety, right? And what acceptance is saying is if you drop that struggle, you don't need to spend all your energy on that struggle. And then instead, you can spend your energy on understanding your values, taking your committed action, working to see what's going on, how you are separate from your thoughts. And again, when it comes to writing, In terms of setting committed actions, writing can be a really fabulous way to hold yourself accountable when it comes to acceptance and understanding the situation you find yourself in and a willingness to be with that and not struggle with it. Writing is a really powerful way to just process all of that stuff. So, and within ACT, and I think a future podcast episode for you would be fabulous to get an ACT person, a true ACT pro on here. It's called the hexaflex, which I think is a lovely word, because each of these 6 principles work together in tandem, and they can work across this kind of hexagon. So you might work with some acceptance to understand where you are and see what values you might need to kind of go forward, or you might spend some time getting in touch with the present moment, and then that really helps you separate your thoughts from your kind of sense of self. So there's a whole myriad of ways this process can work. And as I say, it's really fabulous as a therapeutic tool, but the way I really like to use it as well is just a way of being in the world. How do I want to show up in the world? How am I able to be as kind as possible to myself? And often that does involve dropping struggle, realizing that thoughts I have do not define who I am, and trying to, as far as possible, to live a values-driven life. So there you go, a very imperfect, but actually I think quite consistent ACT, run through what ACT is from my layperson's non-psychologist perspective. What do you reckon?
I love it. It's very practical. It's not simplified, it's not dumbing it down, but it is making it very practical and meaningful and actionable for anyone listening. Not only with the relation to writing, how this model and this approach can be used to when we're writing and when we're using this tool of, capturing our thoughts for therapy, for self-development, for healing. There are lots of ways writing can be used to help us to be better, feel better, be happier, be more settled. And I think it was a perfect example of, that some scientific research, complicated methodologies can be used so simply in our daily lives. So thank you for that. I love that. I think I've never heard of ACT before, actually, and I will definitely afterwards pick your brain on some possible ACT therapists that we might bring over here for an episode. But I would love to take you on the node mentioned in your talk to explain the difference between, or define for us, the reflective creative writing, journaling, and any other kind of writing that our listeners may be considering. Obviously, we're putting aside the business writing, copywriting and book writing, and this kind of like, let's get money and let's create something of a value, rather than the introspective, the healing, the empowering types of writing that you do and you help people tap into.
Sure, absolutely. And I think on that note, it's really worth saying that the creative reflective writing that I'm just about to kind of talk about really can be a powerful practice for business writing, because increasingly, and this is a whole other episode, but in a world of AI, in a world where people there's so much content out there, really leaning into what it is to be human and proper kind of human authentic stories and people connecting with people is almost a differentiating factor now in terms of standing out. So I think there's so much scope for the creative reflective stuff to influence copywriting and content writing too. But yeah, so what is creative reflective writing? In some ways I find it easier to define it by what it's not. So it's not creative writing in the sense that all the workshops I deliver and the sessions I run and the retreats I run, and I do this all over the place. I do it in prisons, I do it out in the woods, I do it for corporate away days and strategy days and team Christmas parties, and basically wherever I get an invitation. And it's not that I'm teaching creative writing in these sessions. And in fact, the kind of mantra that you might remember, Lenka, that I often say is, you can't write it wrong, which is a kind of a neat way of saying, please don't think this is about learning how to write a story like you perhaps might remember from school, or it's about being as compelling as possible, like you might need to be in copywriting or business writing. It's about going with your first thought and seeing where it takes you and using some creative modalities to get us to unexpected places. So it's borrowing from the world of creative writing. So we might have poems as starting points, or little tiny bits of story, or working with objects, or writing to our feelings or a part of ourselves, or taking different points of view or perspective, all of which are kind of exercises and practices that happen in the creative writing world. So we borrow from that. So I kind of think if creative writing is yellow, and then journaling is blue. So journaling being the kind of free writing, having your notebook and doing perhaps the morning pages practice that Julia Cameron suggests, and having blank page writing, or having a simple sentence starter writing like right now I feel, that sort of stuff. It also borrows from that. But creative reflective writing is almost like the green in the middle, right? So what it will do is take a creative starting point, like it might be, I don't know, something like, right now, if you were a room in your house, which room in your house would you be? And force you to kind of start there. And then through writing with this can't write it wrong mantra, with this free writing type mantra, you kind of write yourself back home to what's important. So it's creative reflective writing is a bit different because it will often give you a bit of a challenge or a bit of constraint. And, I will always sort of set a timer, because I think when we give ourselves a bit of challenge or constraint, it's a kind of healthy pressure, a healthy stress, if you like, that kind of forces our conscious faffing around brain to just get out of the way, and our pen can take over for a bit. So it has a kind of creative challenge element to it, but then it has a very permissive journaling type element to it where we see what happens. And then also what's really important, and I think why I really loved particularly to do this sort of stuff with groups. So it very much can work as an individual practice. And, people keep saying to me, why haven't you written the World Spill book yet? And it's partly because I can't bring myself to have another thing to sell, if I'm perfectly honest. But one of the reasons why I haven't written the Word Spill book yet is because I think these things happen most powerfully when they happen in a group. And I always say sharing is absolutely, absolutely optional. And there are some people that come to my sessions and, apart from saying hi at the start, never say a word. It's totally fine. But often when people do share with each other, two things happen. On the one hand, people have this kind of, oh yeah, me too moment. And they feel much less lonely because whatever's come up for them has come up for someone else. And then, that sparks a conversation and they really get into something. It doesn't have to be like, really deep, shadowy stuff. It can be anything to do with overwhelm or to do with nostalgia or planning or whatever it might, anything. There's that kind of me too aspect to it. But equally, it's just as powerful if, I don't know, you do a writing exercise, and I don't know, we did one recently about the sun, for example. And for some people, they really took it in the direction of high energy and enthusiasm and being on top of the world and blazing and all that sort of thing. Other people took it very much down a kind of aggressive, being scorched, kind of violent almost direction. And I think there's also real power in seeing where there is difference, because by seeing it kind of shows you your blind spots. Like if you're doing some writing and you've ended up writing about something being really violent and aggressive, it's not that that's wrong. And it's not that those people who went down the kind of high energy meadows and flowers approach was wrong either. It's that it's telling you something about what's coming up for you right now. And that's what's really important and connective. So that's what creative reflective writing is. It's that kind of green bit that borrows from the yellow of creativity, if you like, and the blue of reflection, and has this kind of really kind of fertile, growthful connection to self bit in the middle that I find, and lots of people who do this stuff find, is even more powerful for them than just doing journaling. Does that answer your question?
Wow, that's amazing. And you've described it in a really great way. And I love how you bring in the yellow and the blue and create the green. And you've really explained how therapeutic creative writing can be. I mean, when you first mentioned creative writing, I went down the nightmare hole of, at school, you will write a creative essay and it will be, and of course my teacher said I write like a telegram. I don't know if anybody can remember, because I found it really difficult just to express. And then I had this idea and this belief was planted into my head. And it's only now that I'm starting to realize, actually, I can write, but I didn't fit the criteria at school. And it wasn't something that was brought out or allowed to develop. It was, well, you can't, you've got to get better at creative writing because you write like you're writing a telegram. And it was like, so it became a stress thing. And I love how you've explained it, because it's like, right, thank you. I can be a creative writer without having these beliefs sitting, from there. I can still picture the teacher. I can picture myself in the classroom. So it is, teachers have a lot of, I don't know, a lot of stuff that they put out in the world that's incorrect, or just these beliefs that we've picked up. So thank you for really going into it and helping me to understand that creative writing is not, now write a story and I want to feel it, because not everybody is a story writer, but yet you can still be a creative writer. So thank you for really just bringing that possibility into my life and into our listeners' life, and just helping to see the difference between journaling. I do love journaling. That's something that I do get into. But this creative writing is, as you said, it's more of a step. It's going further, going deeper. And thank you so much for that, and really explaining it in such a beautiful way. You can see you use words. But I do want to go down the different path that is really topical at the moment. I've watched a lot of videos and YouTubes about it, because I am interested in what's happening and how it's working, and that is AI. We've had a creative writer, a guest, Andy Green. I think I've said his whole name, or I most probably missed it.
It's Andy Greenhouse, and he's a videographer, and he writes on LinkedIn regularly. So just to clarify, he's mostly a videographer, but he just found himself in writing on LinkedIn. So yes, check out episode with Andy Greenhouse.
Yes, I knew that Lenka would have it, but he talked about the writing and the journey that he was on with writing. And we did touch on AI, and AI is becoming a huge thing, especially in the copywriting industry. It's writing for books, writing for business, writing for websites. And I'd love to know your thoughts on it when it comes to the therapeutic side of writing, or the, as you said, the creative writing. Do you see a difference, or are people reaching out to AI to help them to write? I'd love to know just your perspective on AI and what your experiences have been.
Absolutely. Okay, so the first thing I will say about my perspective on AI, and I honestly say this as someone who, I'm not coming at this from a perspective of being threatened by it, but it's a genuine concern I have from an environmental perspective, and that is the water usage that AI, these large language models require to cool their systems. And I think it's not something that's been talked about enough. And I think when it is talked about, there's a kind of sense of, oh, well, it's the future, so we all just need to get on board. And I genuinely hope, if I'm self-aware enough to realize that I'm probably the sort of person that is never going to be an early adopter of new technology. Like if I was born 200 years ago, it might have taken me a while to get on a bike. Or if I was born 50 years ago, it might have taken my family a while to get a TV in the house, or more than 50 years ago. But you know what I mean? So I'm going to be self-aware and say that I would probably never be the person that's going to be yes to AI. But I just want to say that up front, like I think the frivolous use of AI without thought for what it's doing to our world's resources is something that is deeply concerning. And equally, I get it. I've got friends and people I respect hugely who, coming to your point, Natalie, use AI in a really therapeutic way for them. So I've got a friend who's a coach, and she uses AI as a kind of supervision tool to help her debrief from her coaching work. I have another friend who comes to my sessions and does some, I run sessions in the woods, nature writing for well-being. She comes to those, but she also works with AI to almost in a kind of therapeutic co-coaching type way. And I think AI can be really affirming, and I can absolutely see why people use it. But I don't think there's a replacement for both the kind of critical inquiry that we can do for ourselves with our own pen and paper and hand, or if you want, tapping out on a laptop. But there is, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but there is study that suggests when you do handwriting, there's different stuff going off in your brain versus when you're tapping on a keyboard. Like different analytical processes are sparked by the process of long form handwriting. So I think there is very much something about doing it for yourself, with yourself, and seeing what happens. And absolutely, if there were water cooling type systems and the technology was brought on super quickly to mean AI was kind of carbon neutral or carbon positive, I'd be much more curious about how it might be helpful as a kind of therapeutic creative tool. And in the early days, before I realized about this environmental stuff, I got AI to write a haiku about I put in a question like, can you write a haiku about grief and blossom, because it was sort of spring a couple of years ago, and I was just curious as to what it could do. And it can create fabulous haiku and a really lovely prompt for consideration. So it's very, very capable of these things. I would say, I think from other people who have used it, one of the faults it has at the moment is that it's very affirming, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We like to be affirmed, but I know from coaches who have used it, that is also a bit of a blind spot and a weak spot if it's been constantly affirming. And we all know it can lie as well. There's been some horror stories around. There's one. I think it's done the rounds amongst various kind of social media and writer circles. Certainly, a writer who was doing a pitch. She wanted some help with ChatGPT with producing a pitch to an agent, right? So she wanted some help deciding what pieces to put in her portfolio to pitch to the agent. And go and find this for yourselves. But long story short, ChatGPT was very affirming about her pieces. And when she delved a bit deeper and asked it some more searching questions, it had not read a single one. And when she challenged it, the ChatGPT was like, oh, I'm really sorry. Yes, I messed that up. I got that wrong. I won't do it again. And then did it again. And then said, oh, I'm really sorry. I got that wrong. I won't do it again. All in a very naturalized voice. So I think there's lots of studies around how ChatGPT and other AI programs are programmed to kind of get themselves out of tight spots, and they don't need to tell the truth to do it. So I think there are some potential ethical, I mean, let's set aside all the kind of piracy of people's creative voice and all that sort of stuff. There are some potential kind of therapeutic, ethical pitfalls to it. There's definitely some environmental issues that I think, for my part, I am avoiding it as much as possible, because I feel, in the way that, I try to minimize the flights I take, I try to be careful about the choices I make in life. It comes back to this kind of values driven thing. I'm just one person. I realize that's a kind of tiny, what's the word, like ripple in the ocean, drop in the ocean. But I wish we could all put more energy into providing some solutions to how to solve this water crisis, and potentially think about what we are losing when we devolve and delegate our critical, reflective processes to AI, rather than kind of support ourselves and support each other. So yes, I definitely think it's got potential as a tool. Right now, not for me, and I just suggest a note of caution.
Thank you. And we love, our guest perspectives and different views. But one of the things that I've been thinking about, and when I've been listening to these podcasts, I know Simon Sinek, he's one of my favorite authors. I think Lenka likes him as well. He's talked a lot about it, but it's about this idea that it becomes a tool which we use, but it can also make us lazy. And then instead of, I take this very much from a personal point, is you writing, let's say, a blog or a newsletter or your website page or something, and it can sometimes feel really difficult, and you sitting there, you starting again, you learning, you trying to feel it. Whereas AI can then just, like, you can type in 5 words and then you get a load of different options. It can almost make you not go through that process of sitting through it and hashing it out. And I love a thesaurus. I love finding different words that have different meanings so that I'm not repeating myself. But it's not, you still got to go through it, and then you read all these words and you're thinking, that one doesn't sound right, or hang on, let me get the meaning of that one. But it's a process that you go through that doesn't take 5 minutes. It can sometimes take a good couple of hours. It can even take a couple of days to really get it, that it feels who you are. And it almost feels like AI is the easy option to just say, oh, you know what, I can't do that. I'm just going to quickly do AI. And it's almost like a slippery slope of, well, why? Let me just do it. I don't have time. I'm going to make dinner for the kids, or I'm going to do something. I'm just going to quickly do AI because I need this to get out. And then it's next time, oh, well, AI was really, let me just do it because I'm busy. And everybody is busy. Everybody is overwhelmed. Everybody's overworked. And we are constantly trying to just get through the day. And one of the things that really sort of got me thinking is Simon said in this podcast that I was listening to, he said that he's noticing more and more people are starting to put was written or was painted by a human. And I think he talks about his process that he went through writing his book. He says it was the hardest thing he's ever done, especially his first book. But it's the best thing he's ever done, because he had to go through the grind and just, the mud, and just have those days. And AI almost potentially can take that away from you. And I know it's a personal choice. You can sit there and slog through it, or just hop onto AI. But it's almost become acceptable. And I hear often, oh, well, I'll just ask AI. Oh, well, let me just get ChatGPT to do it, or the other AI programs. I don't know any of their names, but I'll just get them to do it. And I say, but why don't you sit and, yeah, but, you know, AI's there. And this is one of my concerns, is it's becoming too easy, that we as humans are not going through that muddy process and coming out the other side, because it's part of us learning and developing is that muddy process, that am I ever gonna get out the other side? It's like rebirthing. I mean, if you think about the birthing process, there's a whole, dark tunnel type thing. And anything that we do that has the value on the other side as humans is that process that we go through, the mud, the wanting to give up, the keeping going, the resilience of keeping going, the self-talk, everything that happens. And AI can potentially take that away because it's easy.
Absolutely.
That is my concern.
I agree, absolutely. I mean, I do think there is scope for AI to be a powerful kind of sounding board potentially in the future. I'm not sure it's there yet, really. But and again, it comes back to ACT, actually. One of the things they say in ACT is our pain shows us our values and our values shows us our pain. So you talked about, being proud of something, and Simon Sinek saying, this is the most thing I'm proudest of doing. And if you think about what you're proud of in life, normally that's something you've worked really hard for, and it's come with some pain, or with some mud, as you say. It's come through like really having to work at it. And where is that sense of pride, of that sense of connection with self, if it just happens like that at the push of a button? It's not the same thing at all. I don't think it's received, if we're talking about writing as a transaction like business writing. I don't think it's received by the audience in the same way. I think people know, they can tell, there's almost like a sniff test to it, and they know when something's gloriously imperfectly human versus shiny and just a little bit brittle, in the way that the AI content is. So absolutely, I agree. I think there's a loss in terms of process when we take the quick solution. I think it comes back to, the work that I was doing when I was sort of transitioning from only being a copywriter into supporting people with creative reflective writing into writing for self-discovery, really. It's that connection with yourself. And that's so important. And the work I do, one of the groups I run, my online membership, is called Word Spill. And I called it that for two reasons. Firstly, it is that sense of a bit like journaling. It's about spilling words onto a page, not overthinking it, just letting it happen. That's spillage, right? And that's kind of an obvious connection to make. But the second reason I called it Word Spill, and this was also equally important to me, was because when you do this stuff, there is a spillage into the rest of your life. And it might be in a really small way. Like one of my she's still in the group now, but one of my very early members of Wordspill, and it started 5 years ago, I remember her writing early on about, I did this prompt, and then it made me realize, I could smell that coffee from that baker's, and it just made me feel like I was in the world more. And I went and bought that coffee, and I wouldn't have done that otherwise. And, I was just really alive in the day that morning. So just tiny, tiny things, but it's about being properly alive. And then other people will, say, I booked that holiday to Peru. And again, I'm not making this up, genuine example. I booked that holiday to Peru because I did this writing exercise. And it made me realize, life's too short. I need to book that holiday to Peru. So this sort of stuff really can have a ripple effect into how you experience life. It can help you access your own voice, which helps you access your own confidence. It can help you sift out what's important from the noise. It can help you decide where you are kind of letting others hold you back. There are so many ways having a creative reflective writing practice just helps you live life in a more alive way. And that's why I wish more people would do it. Because like you say, I mean, the school does have a lot to answer for. And this is a whole other conversation, but I home educated my children for 7 years because of entirely the things you were saying earlier, Natalie. Whereas, and I don't believe it's entirely the teachers. I don't believe it's the teachers' fault. Certainly the ones I know agree with me that this is not really what creativity is about. Teaching children to use fronted adverbials and stuff is not teaching them how to write. It's teaching them how to follow some rules that they don't need to learn particularly. And that actually it'd be much more powerful to enable them to be creative. And, you know, my local school has me go in and I say, and they know this, the teachers know this, I say, in this room right now, we don't worry about SPAG, spelling, punctuation and grammar. Our rule is we can't write it wrong. And as long as we're respectful, anything goes. I encourage creative rebellion. I tell these children exactly the same things that I tell my membership group, that I tell the corporate people when I go there, that I tell the people in prison when I go into prison, you know, and they are liberated because of that. And actually they produce some amazing stuff, because it's almost like if you look for magic and like try and stare at it down the face, you'll scare it away. If you kind of just see what happens, you kind of see like pixies dancing out the corner of your eye. And that's what this sort of writing does. It enables the magic to come out of the corners of your world. And then you can just be a bit more playful going through life. And that, as I say, has a ripple effect into how you experience the rest of your life, which means you might say yes to that opportunity to speak at that thing, or you might say yes to that promotion, or you might say yes to come on a podcast, or whatever it might be. It's almost like the notebook is a creative playground that enables you to play more in life afterwards.
I love that. Thank you so much. That really is a great way of explaining things and showing us that we do need to go through the mud sometimes. It is a helpful tool. Bit dirty, bit yucky, but it's great. And how many women go to have mud packs at the spa? So it could be really good as well. And this is where we ask Gayle, can we please have your gold nugget?
Okay, great question. I would say my gold nugget for your listeners is this mantra of you can't write it wrong, and we are all writers. And I would just invite people to use that however they wish. So actually for you, if free writing and journaling is a really powerful practice and that's what you need, I'm not knocking it, go for it. You can't write it wrong. See where the blank page takes you. If you think having a bit of creative challenge and time and being put in a slightly unfamiliar place on your page and then writing your way back home is for you, I would seriously encourage you to look into the sorts of creative, reflective writing experiences you might have on offer, because writing in this way, where you can't write it wrong, is a creative playground for your life. If you can do it on the page, you can do it in your life. And so that's where you need to start. There's my nugget.
Beautiful. Thank you. And you can't write it wrong. I love that. Thank you so much. Now, for our listeners, if they want to connect with you, they want to find out more about what it is you do, they're interested in finding out about your workshops, or they just want to pick your brains or discuss or learn more about creative writing, where can people find you?
Okay, so I have I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm on Instagram as Gayle_Johnson_writer. I'm on LinkedIn. You can search for me. I've got red hair. You'll find me. I have a website, and gosh, this is embarrassing as a copywriter. It's a bit dusty. Like, I think there's still a workshop advertised on there from 2023. But anyway, I need to spruce up my website, but it exists. And I also have also that links through to a place where you can join my online writing community, Wordspill, and it shows you other things you can do with me as well. I do have a mailing list, and I send out an email. I don't call it a newsletter because really it is me just yapping on a bit like we're doing today. about writing and life. It's kind of loosely notes on writing and life. I send it out every Friday morning, and people are very welcome to join me there. That's probably where I'm most me. It's the version of me that you've kind of heard today. The easiest way to get into that is a bit.ly link. So bit.ly, so bit.ly/7 free writing prompts. If you join that, that'll get you on my mailing list. And every so often I point you to stuff that I'm offering, but generally it's about this kind of synergy between writing and life, the synergy between creativity and reflection, some ACT stuff about acceptance. Thank you, Lenka, again for that reminder, and mindful practice and values and all that juicy stuff that we've been talking about today.
Wonderful. And obviously we will make sure to add all the links in the description below so people can easily find and click and go there. And I would say for people who are keen to give the reflective creative writing a little bit of a go, do have a look at Gayle's membership, at her community and her WordSpill. I've been there for a while. It's a wonderful place to be. Highly recommend giving it a try. So thank you so much for being here, Gayle. Before you run away, I have one last question. And because here on the podcast we're all about, finding more life in one's life, and writing can be a way to enhancing people's lives and having kind of more of a life first approach. I'm curious, what gives you life right now?
Being in nature, I would say, gives me life. One of the things that I am focused on going forward and that I want to bring to the fore in my own writing is just an appreciation of where we live and the planet we live on and our home. So just kind of, at the moment, I've got raspberries growing in the garden. I can see a cabbage white butterfly out there. I've got these tiny, tiny apples that are growing on my apple tree. My son has just started an allotment club. So he's 6 years old. He's growing his own stuff. Whenever I'm feeling low and rubbish, I go outside. A lot of the writing groups I run outside. The writing retreats I make sure they're not in a boring hotel conference room. They're in a nature reserve. So what gives me life is probably green, like I talked about creative reflective writing being the green. It's the green. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. And nature, there's nothing more powerful than nature. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us, your energy and your experiences and perspectives. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel like we could have hours. I have loved talking to you two. If you want another episode, next year or whatever, about more on AI or more on ACT or more on storytelling or whatever, I'd love to come back because you're fabulous hosts. So thank you.
And for our listeners, what did you get from today? What aha moments did you get? What are you interested now in picking up that pen and grabbing that piece of paper and just writing, using a different part of your brain? Are you wanting to go through that dirt or learn more about it? We'd love to know your thoughts on this conversation we've had today and your experiences with writing. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.